Hey, this is Callan with Integral Lifestyle Design, and today I want to talk to you about spiral dynamics and the Manosphere. So this is going to be a part of the spiral dynamics series that we've already done on the channel, and I really want to talk to you about why men get stuck, because there's a lot of confusion around this on the internet, and there's a lot of demonization of the Manosphere, and there's some validity to that as well. So I really want to dive into it from like a more integral lens so that we can have a look at the thing and have a look at different creators and what's actually going on from a perspective you probably haven't heard of before. So I'm kind of expecting you know what spiral dynamics is before I go into this video. I'll give you a quick little recap. So essentially, spiral dynamics is a developmental model developed by Claire Graves, and later sort of Don Beck and Chris Cohen evolved it. And it's a way of looking at the evolution of consciousness, or the evolution of humans. And they've broken that into 8 key stages. So number 1 here is beige, which is essentially pure survival, basically an animal. Purple then turns into group survival. They're more focused on spirits and kinship and communities and tribes and surviving as a group. Then red introduces power. So basically, from here, it's like using force and using control to get what you want. And then over time, that turns into blue, which is essentially like more truth and force, more black and white thinking. It becomes more hierarchical, and there becomes sort of like higher powers or rules that are followed by the culture. That then can evolve into orange, which is more about like materialism, rationality, success, and essentially self-improving in the sense of being more successful, acquiring more resources or more of whatever it is you want. From there, you can evolve into green, and green is essentially more emotionally based. So it's more focused on relationships and harmony and connection and stuff along those lines, rather than so much success and rationality. From there, you go into what's called a second tier or three-dimensional thinking, which is essentially you start to realize there are stages and levels to evolution, and then you can start to sort of see something like spiral dynamics and gain value from it. So yellow is where things become systemic. You try and get the pros and cons, the best and worst from every stage, and it's more of like a rational and emotional synergy. So you're being rational, but you're also not ignoring the emotional spectrum. And beyond that, you move into turquoise, which is more of a flow, and that's essentially you're not over-analyzing as much, you're more just sort of flowing and feeling interconnected with all life. So that is how they've taken spiral dynamics, and that's how they've essentially mapped out the evolution of human consciousness. I mean, there's lots of other versions of it, like the stages theory, integral theory, and other systems you can look at, but spiral dynamics is quite simple and easy to understand. Again, I'm assuming you know what it is, otherwise this video is going to be over your head. And I've got a whole playlist on spiral dynamics. I've got a video on every stage. There's so much you can dive into before looking at this, which is going to be more of an advanced, very niche topic. So we're going to start with what is the Manosphere, because it's kind of unknown, and this is my personal definition. So it's important when you're talking about something that you define it clearly. So here is what I would say it is. So it's an online ecosystem of male-focused content and communities. And that can vary. It explores masculinity, purpose, dating, and self-improvement, amongst other things. It responds to confusion around the modern male role, and obviously the stage someone's at, that can be different. It includes a wide spectrum of perspectives and ideologies, because the Manosphere is not just like a blanket statement. There's many different lenses and people in the Manosphere. It ranges from constructive growth to reactive controversial views. So there's some, like everything, there's some valuable stuff and there's other things that could be destructive or harmful. It's not a unified movement. So it's internal and conflicting. You always get people in the Manosphere arguing with each other and going on about it, right? And that it's heavily shaped by social media and digital culture. So it's an online space. Manosphere, it's basically man's sphere, man's space. And a man's space could be anything from like a toxic cult where they treat women terribly and they just are narcissists, all the way to like a community of monks who are trying to seek spiritual enlightenment. It's a big spectrum of things. And then that core question is, what does it mean to be a man today? And that can vary, of course, by the lens of the stage that someone's at in their evolution. And then when you put that stuff together, so the spiral dynamics and the Manosphere, you can look at it like this. The Manosphere is not one idea, but multiple stages of development. like anything, it can move through these spiral stages. Like the manosphere at stage red is going to be very different from the manosphere at stage yellow. Then each stage reflects a different way men respond to the same problem. So like someone at red, for example, would look at women very differently than somebody at stage green. Red could be more like it's power and control and they want access to women and they're controlling them. Where green's more focused on flattening the hierarchy, egalitarianism, and having a harmony between men and women and being emotionally grounded. So no stage is entirely right or wrong. Each has strengths and limits. So there's pros to each stage and there's cons to each stage. Men often move through these stages over time. So as you grow up, you move through them. Although a lot of people don't get to the higher stages. They sort of solidify usually between blue and green. Yellow is more rare. Turquoise is very rare. They get stuck in one stage and that creates blind spots. So for red, that could be a power dynamic. For orange, they could see women as success objects. For green, they could be overly emotional and become more feminine in their own energy and lack or even demonize the masculine parts to themselves. It really depends. So then real growth comes from integrating the strengths of each stage. It's powerful. Understanding the full map creates clarity, not confusion. So being able to see the manosphere from a spiral lens is going to give you a far more depth than looking at it just from one angle. Then the goal is not to pick a side, but to evolve. So it's not just to burrow yourself into one lens, it's just to have a look at the overarching vision of what it is. And that could be applied to anything. Like this is doing the manosphere, but you can apply that to any model, any system. All right, now this is a documentary that made me want to make this video, Inside the Manosphere. And essentially, I want to explain to you what it is if you haven't seen it. It looks at the manosphere, but it looks at lower tiers of the manosphere. It's really looking at like red through orange. And it's a green perspective focused on harm and empathy. So it's coming from green, which is more emotionally centered. And it's looking at red, mainly red and orange, a little bit of blue, but mainly red and orange. And it's looking at how men on those levels of the spiral can harm women and how they can harm other men, and how that can be kind of destructive. And it's from a green lens because it's being emotional. It's not being so much integral. It's not trying to look at the manosphere holistically. It's looking at it from a specific lens of green and primarily focusing on the negativity of it, on how it can be used as a harmful thing, how it can be used to harm men. It doesn't focus on the positives. It doesn't focus on how men's creators can help men, how they can help men to self-improve, how they can create healthier relationships. And I'll give examples from each stage as we go through. So that's mainly what it's doing. It's highlighting dominance, power, and status dynamics, which again, they're lower. That's like red, a little bit of orange as well. So we're not looking at higher tiers of what the manosphere is. Also, it's developed through an orange media and storytelling lens. It's on Netflix, which is kind of an orange corporation. You know, it's made for a specific audience, primarily, which is going to be people at stage green, which is about 10 to 20% of the population, depending on where you are in the world. It's shaped for engagement rather than full objectivity. So it's not coming in saying, let's have an integral look at what the manosphere is across its stages of evolution. It's really narrowing on that one lens and using some more extreme examples or lower vibrational humans, as unfortunate as that sounds. It emphasizes extremes more than the full spectrum. It presents a partial, incomplete picture. And like you can use a lens like spiral dynamics or integral theory or stages theory, ego development theory, so on, to look at something like this objectively and not just to be emotionally led by it. So this is more for people at yellow and above that understand this. I'm not saying there's a harm in green doing this, and a lot of people are looking at green from a lens of like red, blue, and orange, and they're not understanding the objectivity of it. They're kind of missing the point. But from yellow, you can look down at it. You can look down, not in an overpowered way either. You just look down at it and try and study it for what it really is. But because this documentary has gone into the culture, it has skewed men's spaces and sort of made them look like they're toxic and harmful, which some of them definitely are, but there's also men's spaces that aren't like that. So let's jump in. So the manosphere at stage red. Again, red is our power stage. It's our stage where we learn that we can use power to control others. So there are positives to that. Some of the positives are it reconnects men with strength, drive, and aggression. That's kind of important. Like the masculine does have strength, it does have drive, and it does have aggression. And it's about how that's channeled. Is that channeled for positive and negative? Is it service or is it just ego gratification? It breaks men out of passivity and victim mentality. Again, this is good. Like the masculine very often wants to do, it wants to feel like it's serving, like it's useful, like it's playing a part in the world, like someone can stand on their own 2 feet and exist and not be ashamed of their masculinity or ashamed of any of those elements. It encourages bold action and risk-taking. Again, masculine beings often take more risks. And as a result, they can achieve great success, but at the same time, risk can go either way. It can pay off or it can sometimes end really badly. It builds confidence and self-belief. This is powerful too. It makes people more confident. It makes people believe in themselves, that they can be in the world, that they can move in the world, to be who they are. It rejects shame and social conditioning. So it basically says society tells you this. Does that matter to you? Does it validate you? Maybe yes, maybe no. Like in the Manosphere, they've got the idea of the matrix, which is sort of in the red-orange spectrum of the whole thing, regardless of what you think about that idea. Then it develops a sense of personal power. It makes you feel like you can get stuff done, like you have control of your life. These are all positives of red. These are all power plays, that you can dominate your reality in a sense. Of course, so there's negatives. So the first one, it can promote arrogance, ego, and narcissism. And that's really clear when you look at the Manosphere and you look at some of the characters that are there. It can encourage domination over connection. So that could be men dominating women, treating women as sex objects, treating women as lesser than. The traditional kind of patriarchy. They're bigger and stronger, so they're going to use that to subject women to their will. Again, low vibrational, but it does exist. It lacks emotional depth and self-awareness. They definitely can. Lack emotion entirely. Emotion can even be demonized. They can hide from it. They can say, I'm not going to deal with that. I'm not going to hide. I'm just going to hide and I'm going to acquire and use power. There's sometimes a very, very low depth of emotions. Sometimes anger is the only one they can feel, which is a shame. And then it's often short-term focus, so sex, status, validation, just on being powerful and feeling powerful in that moment. And it can lead to conflict, instability, and poor relationships because, of course, it can. If you're just dominating someone, especially someone at a higher stage than red, which is the majority of humans, then they're not going to fall into that frame. They're not going to want to follow you. They're going to see you as immature or as controlling, and of course they are. And then they can frame relationships as adversarial rather than cooperative, and that's pretty true as well. Like, say a woman speaks her opinion, someone at red could be like, you just follow me, you don't have an opinion, you're just an extension of me, and you're going to do what I say. And obviously that doesn't work in the modern day and age. So red can have a lot of negatives, and the Manosphere of red can too. So my example for red is good old Andrew Tate. He's a prime example of red. A couple of examples. He's got a strong emphasis on dominance, power, and control. He likes his dominance, power, and control, and he talks about that in every frame of his life. He frames life and relationships as competitive and hierarchical, because of course he does. He talks about hierarchy and competition all the time, and he's saying you've got to be at the top of the hierarchy. That's his whole thing. And then he sells courses and whatever on trying to help people to do that, whether they work or not. It prioritizes status, wealth, and visible success because you can see it, you can feel it. And from a red perspective, that draws people, it draws women, it makes you bigger. Again, from a narcissistic point of view, your ego inflates, you become bigger. He rejects weakness, vulnerability, and submission. So he talks about weakness, vulnerability, and submission like they're bad things, like they're going to make your life worse. And then he encourages bold, unapologetic self-assertion regardless of social norms. So he's like, you do you, dominate regardless. Society is going to try and make you weak. You have to transcend that. And as you can see, as Andrew Tate, they're very red ideas. And the reason he's so polarizing is because he speaks to that part of men who feel like they're oppressed, who feel like they can't get ahead. And they start to think that the system might be against them, and Andrew Tate's sort of a archetype confirming that. And that's especially true for younger men that are earlier on their self-development path. So because of those reasons, I think he's a prime example of red. And like everyone, there's pros to Tate and there's cons to Tate, but there's some destructive things in there as well. And most of the culture's beyond red, so they see Tate sort of as a bit of a wild human, which I guess he is. Now let's jump up to blue. The Manosphere at stage blue. Here's some positives. So, Blue in the Manosphere, it provides structure, discipline, and clear direction. Some things people definitely need in their lives if they lack those. Green can lack a lot of these things. For example, even though it's a higher stage, sometimes they're not structured, disciplined, or have clear direction. They're more in their emotions. It can encourage responsibility, duty, and accountability. That's also important. They're accountable to the people around them. They're working within society. They're trying to enhance society and create harmony in a way. It promotes long-term thinking, so family, commitment, legacy. And again, these are important things as humans. Having families and communities and a sense of legacy to make humanity a better place is noble. It builds strong moral frameworks and personal standards. So it gives you a code. It's black and white in that sense. It's I am a good person. I will do this. I will not do this. I will look after my family. I will not cheat on my wife because society says that's bad. I won't do it. I will go to church. I will pray for my God. Whatever it is. It's black and white. I will do this because that's the right thing to do. And if you don't do that, you're in the wrong. And there's punishments if you're in the wrong. It also develops self-control and delayed gratification. So blue can it doesn't need instant gratification. It can grind and work towards things in the future. Like having a family, that can be instant but also delayed. You're raising humans. Or climbing a corporate ladder. Things that don't feel right straight away. But then obviously there's negatives to blue. Like it can become rigid and overly dogmatic. It's black and white. If you don't align with the culture, then you're just wrong and the culture's right and you have to conform. You have to suppress your individuality and become a cog in the machine, so to say. Then it promotes black and white thinking about gender roles. So it's like a male role is to do this. A female role is to do this. Like the man's job is to go out and provide and protect. The female's role is to nurture and to be in the home. And again, they're stereotypes, I guess. But from a blue lens, black and white, it's like men have to do this, women have to do this. They're not thinking about the individual, they're all different. They're not being egalitarian about it. They're saying, okay, men's role is this, women's role is this. And you look at traditional cultures, say like Afghanistan, and that's really obvious that that's enforced on a real deep level. It may suppress emotional vulnerability. Sometimes being emotional isn't correct. It's more about progress and harmony. Say, men aren't supposed to feel their feelings. They're supposed to be hard and productive and sacrifice for society. Like the mentality, say, the ship's sinking, like the Titanic's sinking. All right, men are on last, women and children first, because that's how it's done. The women and the children get to go first. So there's mentalities like that. It can rely on shame and guilt as motivation. So if you don't follow the rules, you're shamed, you're guilted. If you don't go to church, you're told you're going to go and burn in hell. If you don't want to have a family, you're told that you're selfish, and so on. It goes through the culture. If a woman wants to be a big boss, she's told that she's doing the wrong thing, that she should give up and then have kids. And if a man just wants to flow and be a bit of a hippie and travel around, he's told to sort of get up and start climbing the hierarchy and be more productive in society. And it struggles with nuance in modern relationships because it's black and white. And a lot of us aren't black and white anymore. Like blue's about roughly 30% of the global population that will fall into these roles. But a lot of modern people don't, So a really good example of the Manosphere at blue, I reckon, is Jordan Peterson, who a lot of you probably know who that is. So some reasons why is there's a strong emphasis on responsibility, duty, and personal order. He talks about that stuff all the time. If you've read his book, 12 Rules for Life, he really gets into that. He encourages discipline through habit, structure, and routine. Again, it's like black and white. It's like having your own moral code and having rules for yourself and ways you're going to show up in the world. He promotes clear moral frameworks and personal values. He really does. Like he talks about his religion. He talks about right and wrong. He talks about ways to live that are healthy, ways that aren't healthy. He advocates for delayed gratification and long-term meaning, which is good. That's a powerful thing sometimes. People need that. And he frames masculinity around becoming reliable, stable, and accountable. But again, that's his opinion, but based on his perspective, that's like an overall norm of society, that masculine beings have to be reliable, stable, and accountable. So that's kind of Jordan Peterson. He's kind of more black and white in the sense that he explains the world. Like, you should do this, you shouldn't do this. This is the right way to live, this is not the right way to live. There's a lot of that in Jordan Peterson's sort of communication style. Again, these people aren't wholly this. Like Andrew Tate's got a lot of orange. Jordan Peterson's got he's got a bit of yellow in him too. He's kind of evolved in ways, but he does have a pretty strong center of blue. So you see already that the Manosphere isn't blanket. There's different levels. Like we've just done Tate and now we're doing Jordan Peterson. Both Manosphere, but different. Very different. All right, now let's jump up to the Manosphere at stage orange. This is probably the peak of the Manosphere where most people are. You've got some people down at red, but this is the mass, like the success, the drive, climbing the hierarchies, achieving more. There's positives to that. So the first one we've got is encourages ambition, success, and financial independence. They're massive on that. They want to be ambitious, successful. They want financial independence. It promotes self-improvement across fitness, skills, and mindset. You see a lot of the influencers saying you got to go to the gym, you got to get rich, you got to do all this because then you'll have the network, then you'll have the women, then you'll have the lifestyle of status that you want. It develops strategic thinking and awareness of incentives. So it's being, okay, you want to be worth $10 million. How do you do that? What's the how? How do we get there? Who do we need to talk to? What business do you need to build? So on. It becomes very rational in its way, in its thought. It builds confidence through competence and results. That's kind of important as well. It doesn't really care about what people think, like what they feel. What you feel doesn't matter. It's about, is what you're doing working? Yes or no? It's a kind of binary still. You want to start a business. How many customers do you have? How many clients do you have? You've got none. Okay, well, fix it. Figure out what's wrong. It's very rational. It's not really focused on emotion whatsoever. It focuses on personal agency and taking control of life. It's saying you're responsible for your life. If you don't like your life, that's your fault. Go and fix it. It's very blunt in a sense, orange. It's very rational, but very blunt. And there's negatives to that as well. So it can reduce life and relationships to transactions or games. So that could be like a man being told, okay, you need to date the hottest women possible. And that's the most important thing, is how attractive she is. And the more successful you are, the more attractive the girl is. Like stuff along those lines. And they could see the girl kind of as a success object or as a sex object rather than this independent human being like what Green and above would see it. Another one, overemphasis on status, money, and external success. So it's saying, if you have status, if you have money, and you have success, then you're going to be happy. That's what all of us aspire to, and when we get those things, then we're happy. That's sort of the belief of orange, where Green sort of see through that and see that that's not necessarily the path to happiness, to success. And it changes. Someone might get to orange and achieve that, and then in 2 years they get sick of it, and then they move into green. It could lead to cynicism about women in relationships. So it could be like, all women are gold diggers. All relationships are transactional. Things along those lines, you know? Hypergamy. So like if a woman has a higher value guy that comes into the picture, she's going to leave you for the higher power guy. Or she's not yours, it's your turn. It's like, you can't really trust a girl fully because she might just bounce if the situation goes against her. They can create kind of nihilism and make people sad and make people feel like women are, you know, that there's extreme ones like women can't love. That's one as well. Like women can't love like men love. Or men are the romantic sex and women can't be romantic. Like these are all kind of orange beliefs based on what they believe to be rationality. Then you've got self-worth becomes tied to performance and outcomes. So it's like your worth is acquired to your status. If you're successful, then you have worth. But if you're not successful, you don't have worth. Then what is success? It's the material accumulation of things and relationships and so on. That's their belief. And that can create burnout or constant dissatisfaction because the ceiling always goes higher. Like you make 100 grand a year, then you see people making 300 grand a year and you feel like you're inadequate. Or you see you have a beautiful loving girlfriend, but then your friend has a hotter girlfriend and that makes you feel insecure because you're worried about your girlfriend's attraction. It's very rational, but you can see how this can end in a very destructive way. And then I think the best example I could think of for orange in the Manosphere is Rollo Tomasi. So this guy wrote a book called The Rational Male, which is like an insanely stage orange kind of book on the relationships between men and women and other things. But if you wanted like a real orange example, that book will give you one. It's not inherently a bad book, but it's very orange. Like it's very status and rational focused. So some things he does, he frames relationships as systems driven by incentives and dynamics. He emphasizes strategy and understanding the game of dating. So the whole idea of game, it's like women are a prize to be won. And you have to learn how to play this game to acquire them. It's the idea of game. And the psychology of kind of how a woman works and the biology and what a woman is from the biological rational perspective. sort of ignoring the emotions and the personality under it. Focus on self-improvement to increase personal value. So again, acquiring stuff, becoming more powerful, more successful, more known, bigger following, more money, so on. Prioritizes results, leverage, and optionality. So basically saying, the higher status you are, the more options you're going to have in life. And then takes a rational, analytical approach over emotional interpretation. So he's not emotional at all, really. He's saying emotions can be a distraction. You have to look at the facts, you have to look at the data, and you have to use that to make the best decisions possible. Again, this is where most people in the manosphere actually are. They're not at red. They're not just purely angry and trying to use power to control people. They're moving in this orange lens. This is where most people think the manosphere is. And the documentary looks at the manosphere at these levels. So primarily red where Tate is and orange where Rollo Tomasi is. And a little bit of blue. Now let's move to green, because the manosphere does exist in stage green. A lot of people are like, it's lower tier. It's not necessarily. It goes all the way. So here's the manosphere at stage green, which again is about community, about emotions, about connection, so on. Here's some of the positives of that. So it encourages emotional awareness and vulnerability, which is quite different from orange. It's more emotionally based. It promotes empathy and understanding in relationships. So men start to feel other men's feelings. They start to feel compassion, not just for men, but for women, for children, from people in other cultures. They start to feel like humanity is a whole. It's not just a bunch of separate groups in conflict, but it's a whole, and we can harmonize that. It focuses on healing trauma and personal growth. So men start to try and heal. They look at their trauma, they look at their belief systems, and they try to grow to be more balanced and whole, which is beautiful. It values authenticity over performance or status. So green isn't as focused on how successful someone is from that material, rational perspective. It's more focused on just being authentic, on being who you are, which is also beautiful. It supports deeper, more meaningful connections. People want to go deeper together. They want to feel each other. A man at green doesn't just want a trophy wife. He doesn't just want to date the hottest girl possible. He wants a real connection. He wants to really sync up with that woman on a deeper level. And all of that's really beautiful, and people don't see that side of the manosphere, at least not in the mainstream media, but it 100% exists. And yeah, because again, manosphere, from my definition of it, is men's space. It's a space for men to self-improve. That's basically what it is. Then we've got the negatives, though, of green. So men at green in the manosphere, or creators or whatever, they can become overly soft or lack direction. So they're emotional now, but they're overly emotional, and they start to lose that rationality. They start to primarily talk about their feelings and judge things based off their feelings rather than using facts and data and rationality, which can lead to a lot of suffering and confusion. They can avoid conflict or strong boundaries. So sometimes they don't speak their mind. Sometimes they don't set boundaries, or they don't talk to people about problems they're having because they feel like they don't want to intrude on somebody else. And that can be really common in green. They don't assert themselves. So that's where something like integration of red, of being assertive and being a bit dominant, can help someone at green. But that doesn't really come until yellow. Then they can over-prioritize feelings over reality or results. So rather than looking at the data and analyzing the data, someone at green can just think about how they feel, and they could be like, I want to change how I feel. And instead of looking at like a logical, rational problem, they say, how can I change my feeling? And they try and use feelings to do that, which often doesn't work. Then another one is risks of losing a sense of masculine edge or grounded direction. So again, this is very common at green. People usually integrate their opposites. So masculine beings, or men, for say, there's more masculine men on average than there are feminine men. But usually at green, people like to explore their opposites. So someone who's more masculine, when they get to green, they'll start to explore their feminine. And that's the same, say there's a feminine woman, she'll get to green and she'll start to explore and integrate her masculine more deeply. So it's really common. You see a lot of men at green becoming quite feminine in their energy. And whilst there's nothing particularly wrong with that, the masculine parts of them can sometimes become shadow material. They can neglect it, or they can suppress it. They can suppress that energy, that desire to win, that authority, the ability to set boundaries. They can sort of let that go and become too feely and too emotional. And that can affect them 100%, especially if that's not genuinely who they are. Then they can reject structure, discipline, or hierarchy too quickly. Green tends to want to flatten hierarchies, and as a result, again, it's more emotionally focused. Yeah. So it's saying, instead of having this hierarchy that we all abide by, we flatten that, we change that, and we just have everyone's equal on every way. Which, from a green perspective, everyone is equal. Where someone at yellow or orange will be like, well, everyone's not equal. Like, in a sense we are, but in a sense we're not. It depends on the lens. It depends on how we're looking at it. Like, if I've got $10 million and you've got $1 million, that's not an equal amount of money. Or if I'm 6'6" and you're 5'4", we're not the same height. Or if my IQ is 150 and yours is 40, that's different. So in that sense, we're not all equal. We've all got pros and cons to us. But again, that's more yellow. Orange do it too, but yellow do it and integrate the emotion. That's the difference. So an example of someone in the Manosphere at stage green who you wouldn't really think to be in the Manosphere, but they do fit that mold of helping men, is Mark Manson. He's a very good example of green. So some of the things that he does is he emphasizes emotional awareness, honesty, and self-reflection. So he's helping men to feel more, which is a really common thing as men move from orange to green, is they start to feel more. And Mark Manson's very grounded in that, in how to feel more and helping people. He encourages authenticity over status, image, and external validation. So he's not saying climb hierarchies, become as successful as possible. He's saying be who you are, figure out who that is and be that, and fully live it, which is cool. He focuses on meaning, values, and personal responsibility. So he's saying, give your life meaning, figure out what you value, and have responsibility for yourself, and look after yourself, and do what you need to do. He promotes healthy relationships built on mutual understanding. So this is like more egalitarian. There's not this patriarchal men are higher than women sense in green. That more or less gets flattened, which is kind of nice. And, you know, from here on out, men and women are equal in the sense of equally valuable. And that's more of an egalitarian, equal approach. Then the other one is he challenges rigid beliefs and encounters open-minded thinking. So he looks at these strict hierarchies and rule sets of the lower stages and he says, don't worry about that. Just be open-minded, have a look at different people, have a look at different cultures, and feel it out for yourself. So this is more of like a heart-led approach. Instead of being focused on rationality and data and numbers and studies, he's saying just feel it, just sit in a room and feel and figure out what it is you want and what pulls you. And be in your emotions and learn how to work through your emotions and to sit in that. So in that sense, Mark Manson's a really healthy example of green. I quite like Mark Manson. Moving into yellow, like his book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F. It's a great book, you know? And it helps a lot of people. It's a really good emergence into green to stop caring about all the hierarchies and everything and to feel your feelings. And it's a thing most men go through. So the Manosphere evolves. It's not just these lower tier things like Tate and primal, get stuff done, climb everyone's money, women. Like it's not. That's a piece of it. That's a level of it, but you can evolve out of it. And you get to find that out with yellow because we're about to start diving deep. So the Manosphere at stage yellow. This is again when you can think three-dimensionally and you can see all of these levels and stages. So you're kind of going to have to be at yellow to understand what I'm talking about. Otherwise, this whole video won't make sense. So some of the positives, it integrates strength, discipline, success, and emotional awareness. It's integrating all of it. It really is taking rationality and logic and emotion and synergizing them. Somebody can use both, and that's really powerful. Then we've got, it sees multiple perspectives without getting stuck in one ideology. So it can look at the pills, say like the red pill, the blue pill, the black pill, the yellow pill, the purple pill, so on. It can look at all that. It can look at feminism. It can look at like the darker side of the Manosphere. It can look at scientific models. It can look at emotions. It can look at psychology, therapy, spirituality, whatever it is. And it can start integrating and synergizing all of these worldviews and lenses, which is really powerful. It focuses on what works in reality rather than rigid beliefs. So in that sense, it's being emotional. So it's having an emotional filter. But then it's saying, okay, well, that's an emotional filter, but does that work in the real world? Does that work in the real world? Like say there's a woman and she believes there should be a matriarchy, meaning women should have the power, right? Say, okay, women should have the power. That's a belief. But what does that look like in practice? What would the world look like if women had all the positions of power? And you can kind of do stuff like that, which is really interesting. Or do the same with men, like patriarchy. What does it look like if all the men had all the power in 2026? It's interesting to look at that kind of stuff. So it does really a lot of that. It's focusing on what works in reality rather than what you believe works. So you need kind of still a little bit of evidence. It encourages self-awareness, adaptability, and growth. So being aware of who you are, adapting to the world, adapting to things that work. If your feelings are getting in the way, then you might need to adapt and change your values and beliefs just to get something done. And there's a lot of growth that happens in yellow because you go back and integrate. You integrate red, you integrate blue, orange, green, and so on. And it moves beyond conflict into understanding and clarity. You're not fighting. You're not demonizing lower stages. You're just seeing them truly as they are. You're seeing the positives, you're seeing the negatives, and you're understanding that lens of the world and the way people are moving through it, which is, again, really powerful. You're not saying there's one way to do things. You're just saying, well, here's different ways people do things, and you can make up your own opinion on that. But yellow has negatives too. So some of the negatives of yellow in the Manosphere can become overly analytical and detached from action. So analysis paralysis, essentially. People spend a lot of time thinking and looking at every angle, but they're not taking a lot of action. They're not implementing. They're not actually making the changes to their lives. And in that way, they're kind of like armchair philosophers. They just sit there and think about things, but they don't necessarily apply them to their own lives. Another one, they may struggle to commit to one clear path or direction, which again is analysis paralysis. They're weighing out every possible alternative. So what if I start a business? What if I be an employee? Should I have a family? Should I travel and be a nomad, or should I set down roots where I live? And they'll spend so much time analyzing those things to death that they won't make a decision. Another one, they can appear vague or unclear to others. So anyone below yellow, anyone in those lower stages, they're not going to understand yellow. Like, someone will directly contradict their worldview who's at yellow, and they'll take that as a personal attack or a personal conflict. Wait, yellow doesn't mean it like that. Yellow's just saying, well, have you thought about this? And they mean that from an integral view. And especially people at yellow that aren't aware of that these stages exist, because there are people at yellow that don't know about stage development theories. They can say things that kind of piss people off, and that's not their intention. Their intention is just to challenge a belief. But people below yellow, their ego is so tied into that belief that they take a challenge as a personal attack. And you see that all the time. You see that with blue, orange, and green. Like, they all get annoyed if you challenge their worldviews. For blue, that's literal conflict sometimes. For orange, that's sort of seen as competition. And as green, it's seen as like an emotional spike. Someone will get triggered, so to say. And that, you can risk overcomplicating simple problems. That's another essence of it. And as well as that, people at yellow can feel disconnected from community or belonging just because it's such a rare stage of consciousness. Like, we're talking like about 2% of the global population. A lot of people in your circles aren't going to be at yellow. And when you're at yellow, you're going to see these lower stages everywhere, and no one's going to be able to relate to you. You're going to see people stuck inside of their worldviews and unable to see outside of them, and you're not really going to be able to help them there. They're just going to be in that. They're going to grow at their own speed. So that's a powerful thing at yellow. As far as Manosphere creators, the best one I could find that embodies yellow is this guy, Orion Teraban. He's got a YouTube channel called Psychax, which I think is a fantastic channel. And he's quite yellow in the way he makes videos. So here's some things he does. He integrates logic and emotion to understand relationships more deeply, because a lot of his videos are about relationships. That's just how YouTube works. YouTube really upvotes things that are on relationships, money, or health. They seem to be the big three in the personal development space. Not crazy videos like what I'm making about spiral dynamics in the Manosphere. So he does so. He gets logic and emotion, and he integrates both of them. And he looks at the emotion, and he also looks at the logic, which very few creators do. They're usually doing one or the other. He combines psychology, attraction, and real-world dynamics. So he takes psychological. He's a clinical psychologist, a licensed clinical psychologist. So he's got the valid qualifications. But then he also applies that stuff to the real world, and he has a look at what's actually going on, and he'll use different lenses and systems to look at that, all the way from like really hard science all the way to more nuanced stuff like spirituality. So it's pretty cool. He seeks understanding over winning or proving a point. So he's not trying to tell you you're wrong. He's not trying to bully you because you have a different opinion than what he has, like lower stages can. He's just trying to understand something. which is more yellow. Yellow is not really trying to climb and be as successful as possible. It's more focused on knowledge. It wants to understand things. So the manosphere at yellow is more based on that too. It doesn't want to necessarily dominate and win. It just wants to understand things on a deeper level and be helpful, which I also enjoy. I'm quite at yellow in my life, so I resonate with this stuff. It avoids rigid ideologies and one-size-fits-all advice, so there's no boxes, or a box is at least seen as a box. There's no one way to live. There's no one way to do things. It's all subjective. It's all interconnected boxes and lenses, and all of that stuff makes your values and beliefs, which can also be changed at any time. It becomes very fluid and dynamic. And then it emphasizes nuance, context, and individual differences. So basically meaning it's like we're all different. What's actually going on? What's the individual difference? Like when I talked about that Manosphere documentary, I'm doing it from a yellow lens. I'm saying, well, the way it's pitched, like the way it's done is green, and it's green looking at red and orange. So it's emotionally based people looking at people that are more power based and success based, and green's looking at that saying, well, that's flawed. That's not as high level as what we are. That's not how they're thinking about it, but that's essentially what's going on. Where yellow can see this kind of thing playing out, and can also see it through an orange medium being Netflix. It's there to make money, to raise awareness. There's agendas behind it, like there's political agendas, and there's all sorts of stuff going on. And the Manosphere has kind of created that for itself because there's so much toxicity in the space. So hopefully a video like this helps you to see that it's not inherently toxic, it's a layered thing. And then moving beyond yellow, we can go even higher. The Manosphere moves into turquoise, which is our flow, sort of holistic flow state where everything just works, where all this interconnected superorganism. And here's what the Manosphere looks like at turquoise, although this is exceptionally rare when I'm saying this. The Manosphere at yellow, there's some strong sides to it. At turquoise, it's very abstract and rare. So some of the positives, it integrates masculinity with spirituality and deeper meaning, which is really cool. Like, it's like, what is masculine in a spiritual essence? Like, what is masculine energy? It's like a void of infinity. It's peace. It's freedom. It's all of these things. And turquoise really starts to feel that and share that. It emphasizes presence, connection, and conscious living. So it sort of does like what green does, but it's integrated the rationality at this point, and it's flowing in a nice little balance. So being present, being connected, being conscious, being here in the moment. That's really where turquoise goes. It sees relationships as a space for growth and unity. So it's not just getting in a relationship for individual, like egoic reasons. It's getting into a relationship so it can grow, so that it can become more whole. It moves beyond ego-driven goals into service and purpose. So rather than just being egocentric, it's serving. It's like, how can I serve the whole? How can I improve the whole? Think like the Buddha or Jesus or another archetype that's trying to do that. That's essentially what Manosphere at turquoise is aspiring to. Then it encourages deep inner peace and alignment. It's like, how does a man become peaceful and aligned and happy in their energy? And that side of things. But then there's negatives at turquoise, like everything. So one is, can become detached from practical reality. So they become overly spiritual and less grounded in the material, which can lead to sort of, I guess, bypassing different frames of life. They just look at everything as a flow, and they might ignore problems that are kind of direct that could be easily solved. Some other things, they may drift into vague or overly abstract thinking. So it's kind of like yellow. They could overanalyze things or just be thinking too much and not doing enough. They risk spiritual bypassing of real-world problems. Again, they can just spirit their way out. Like something happens, they say, well, that's what was supposed to happen. You know, say they get sick. They're like, oh, that's what was supposed to happen. I'll just ride out the sickness and karma will do its thing. When in reality, they could be more rational, have some more orange and yellow in there and be like, well, I'm sick. What's actually wrong? Let's figure it out. Let's go to a doctor and actually get in there. So there's that side of it. It can lack structure, discipline, or clear direction, again, because it doesn't really have these strong goals like the lower stages. It's just flowing. Like if something happens, it was just supposed to happen and they just adapt to it. So sometimes they lack that clear structure that the lower stages have. And then it could feel inaccessible or difficult to relate to. Like if you think yellow being about 2%, you'd be lonely. At turquoise, we're talking maybe 1 in 10,000 people. It's an exceptionally rare state. So finding people who can resonate with you on that frequency. It's extremely rare. I think I've only met a handful of people at Turquoise in my whole life, and I've traveled around the world and looked for them. They're really rare. Really, really rare. So the Manosphere at Turquoise is more of an idea than an actual thing that exists. Like, what would it look like if it evolved to that level? And this is kind of where I think. So one person who I think is in the Manosphere, on a level, by my definition of it, that is at Turquoise would probably be David Data. I really like this guy. I learned a lot from David Data. So he wrote books like The Way of the Superior Man's his big one, and he basically talks about masculinity, but he gets spiritual about it. He talks about it in its essence, not through cultural lenses and stuff like that. So some things he does I really like. He integrates masculinity with spirituality and deeper purpose. He does that really well. Like, what is masculinity on a spiritual level? What is a masculine being? How do they operate in the world? So on, so on. He emphasizes presence, consciousness, and embodied awareness. So he's saying, be here, be conscious, embody awareness, be in the moment, flow in the moment. Very Turquoise kind of ideas. He views relationships as a path for growth and transformation. So similar to Yellow, but on an even deeper level. It's like we're getting into relationship to be more whole, to grow, which I find is really beautiful. He sees attraction and polarity as energetic and dynamic. So he sees masculine and feminine energy. And masculine feminine is not male female. Like, there's 3 layers to it, if you want to know, a little sidetrack. But there's sex, which is male female or forms of intersex. There is polarity, which is masculine feminine. Everyone's got a different sort of area they sit on that spectrum. And that can change all the time. Like, they can move around that spectrum continuously. And then there's gender, which is more like a cultural thing. It's like, okay, well, what are men, women, or any other gender? How do they fit in society? What's their role? And how do they feel? So gender is more fluid in that sense. That's my stance on it. You don't have to agree with it, but that's how I've looked at it. And I got that from like Marta Nussik and other integral relationship theorists. Yeah, again, beyond this video, but it's interesting. And then he moves beyond ego and control into love, truth, and service. And I think those are the pillars for a beautiful relationship. It's like love, truth, service. They're all gorgeous. They're lovely things. David is a pretty cool human being who I do like. I quite like him. He's an interesting guy. So let's get into, where do men get stuck in the Manosphere? Let's have a look at the Manosphere now through that spiral lens. So the first one, many men get stuck in red, chasing power, control, and validation. So like there's a teenager and they find Andrew Tate, and Andrew Tate's like, you just got to get successful and powerful and dominate and get women and all this. And they fall into that. And that's essentially, you know, mums are seeing their sons become these like tyrannical misogynists that are just patriarchal, and they're just kind of being dicks. And that does give the Manosphere a bad name, because that's what a lot of people think it is. They think it's these teenagers just that hate women that want to get successful, and they feel lost. And there's a lot of loneliness. So a lot of men that are lonely, there's a massive male loneliness issue. They fall into holes like this. They don't have masculine role models, and they gravitate towards this kind of stuff because it's flashy and it's in your face, and they start to think that's what they want. And that is a part of the Manosphere, but it's definitely not the higher vibrations of it. So you've got a lot of other men that they move to orange and they become trapped in status, success, and performance. So they're not necessarily after power. They just want status. They want to be the most high value man around, because what they're being taught by these influences at the orange tier of the Manosphere, they're being saying, the more status you have, the more success you have, the more access you have, the better your life will be, the higher quality people, the higher quality women, the high quality all of this. So then they spend their lives chasing status. And they follow creators that I guess are doing that as well. Yeah, that's kind of powerful. Like Rollo Tomasi is not necessarily the biggest example for that. There's maybe someone like Hamza or another influencer who's like, you have to go to the gym all the time and you've got to make heaps of money and you've got to be free and all this along those lines. And then some guys, there's a green level of the Manosphere, and they wouldn't say they're Manosphere because that word's demonized. They would argue against that. They'd say, we're not Manosphere, we're something else, and have other names. But Manosphere, in its definition that I'm giving it, men's space, they're men's spaces. There are men's spaces at green. And then they kind of can lose direction, edge, and clarity. So each stage can solve a problem, but it also creates limitations. So basically what I mean there is that someone at green they can be overly emotional. They can lose the plot in that sense. They focus more on their feelings and they fall more into their feminine, but at the same time, they neglect the masculine or they even demonize the masculine. Because in their brain, they're not looking at yellow, which is integrated emotion and rational. They're looking at sort of orange and red. They're looking at how those two stages, how would I say it? How those two stages are lower. Like, they're going back into patriarchal viewpoints. They're going back into status games. And green sees that it's beyond that. But obviously, at the same time, green doesn't know there's a yellow. It doesn't know there's a higher level of integration between logic and emotion. And it's quite rare to find people that are at that level. The thing too, each stage solves a problem, but it creates limitations. So sort of the problem at red is I feel powerless, I need power. Then at blue it's I feel like I'm not a part of the group. I don't feel like there's any higher purpose. And then orange says I feel like I don't have success, and because I don't have that, I'm alone. And the way to have people love me and connect with me is to acquire more success. The way to get a girlfriend is to be more successful, to have the six-pack, to have the six figures, and then girls will start to notice me and they'll start to see me as a valid partner option. So there's problems. And then at green it's like, I've just been lost my whole life and I haven't been able to feel properly, and now I can feel properly, and I'm starting to see human beings as human beings and I'm starting to connect with them. And then they move into yellow and they go, actually, there's more to this. Like, it's a whole system. It's all these phases I've gone through as I've grown up. It's pretty cool. Growth always requires moving forward, so not clinging to one identity. It'll change. You've got vertical and horizontal personal development. So vertical is your values and beliefs change and you grow through that. Horizontal is they stay the same and you try and acquire whatever they are. So say you're at orange, right? You're like, I need money and status. Then you're chasing those. And as you require, as you get more money and status, then that's like vertical personal development. But then, that's horizontal personal development. But vertical would be going the other way. It would be saying, you know what, money and status aren't it. It's relationships. And you move from orange up to green. And that would be what I'd see as vertical personal development, where the values and beliefs change. So it's like a deeper layer of software that evolves when you do vertical personal development. Whilst, say, horizontal is just there's more processing power. There's more going on there. You're hitting your values and beliefs more than you previously were. The final thing, we're going to integrate the strengths. So here's our little conclusion. So red, we take strength and courage from red. You can assert yourself. You know who you are. You can set boundaries. Then you take discipline and structure from blue. So you understand hierarchy. You understand where hierarchy can be useful. You understand how society having a structure can be useful. Then you take ambition and competence from orange. So you understand that ambition and being good at stuff is useful. Like having a goal and being ambitious to achieve it and being competent in something is really useful. Then you take empathy and connection from green. So you feel other people's feelings. You can relate to others. You can connect with others. And that's really nice too. Then you take awareness and integration from yellow. So you start to be able to look at systems independently and to combine them and look at the interconnection of all the systems that we have in the world, be that psychological or societal or anything really. And then you take presence and purpose from turquoise. So in turquoise, you learn how to be here now in the moment, and you learn how to have that deeper sense of purpose and to just flow toward it. There's still layering, but you're really just flowing in a direction. You're moving with the universe, so you're letting it move through you. And if you have all of that, you'll be an insanely integrated, awesome human being. So there's layers of the manosphere that try to solve those problems for people. And it just depends where they're in their evolution, what they're going to gravitate towards. So the goal is not to stay in one of these stages, it's to evolve and integrate. And that's not to force evolution, but it's just to naturally go through your life with a lens of understanding. And yeah, essentially that's it. That's spiral dynamics in the manosphere. It's the manosphere and how it can evolve, how it can move all the way from these power dynamics up to doing deep inner spiritual work. So I hope you gained something interesting from that. It's something I felt compelled to make. And it's definitely a longer, deeper topic that's super niche. If you got to the end of this, I'm so impressed. Like, if it makes sense, cool. Comment your thoughts. Is it controversial? Is what I'm saying fair? Or do I have my own blind spots? Let me know in the comments. And if you're into this stuff, subscribe. It's a channel on integral lifestyle design. That's exactly what we're doing here. Integral lifestyle design. We're looking at life and how to do that from an integral perspective. So yeah, Hope you got something out of that. It's super niche. I just felt inspired to make it. No idea what you'll think of it. Do give me feedback if you got to the end. I'd love to know what you thought. And yeah, peace out. Enjoy the rest of your day.